Mary says Kay and her family are professional squatters.
That is case number 419 on the calendar, the matter of Lane versus Thomas. Parties have been sworn in. Judge, you may be seated. Folks have...
Mr. Lane, Miss Thomas was a tenant of yours.
Yes, that's correct.
And it is your claim that she owes you for rent, certain property that she took from the apartment or house that she had rented when she ultimately moved out, and that she also owes you for filing false charges against you in her application for a protective order. You claim that Miss Thomas and her family are professional squatters.
Yes, I do.
Which means that they go into people's homes, they rent them, they pay rent for a while, and they stop paying, and since it takes very often 6 months to a year to get them out, they don't pay rent, and they go from place to place, and that's a scam.
It is a scam.
And you're prepared to demonstrate to me that Ms. Thomas and her family have a history of doing the same kind of thing to other landlords.
Yes, I do.
And I'd be interested to hear about that. In any event, when did you rent? Is it an apartment or a house?
It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, upper middle income with a pool. February, I rented her the home. She signed the lease on February 27th.
Of 2004?
She moved in on 2004. She moved in on March 15th, 2004.
Who moved in?
Valina Thomas, and the premises were leased to her and her daughter. In addition to her moving in, she moved her brother in.
No, just a second. Who signed the lease?
Valina Thomas and Thomas.
Is that your husband? Yes, ma'am. How much was the rent, Mr. Lane?
I asked for first, last, and the security deposit $1,250, Your Honor. $1,250.
I'm going to ask the questions.
Yes, ma'am.
You're going to give me the answers. If I need for you to expand, you're going to do that for me. Do first, last, and security.
That's correct.
Okay, so they paid for March, and it was a year lease?
The check for March, Your Honor, was...
No, was it a year lease?
It is a year lease, yes, Your Honor.
The check for March was what, sir?
The check for March was dishonored by the bank. She alleged that her girlfriend had given her a $569 check.
Okay, so the check for March was bounced.
Yes, Your Honor.
Did she ever pay March rent?
She did, Your Honor.
Okay, when did she pay March rent?
She paid March rent prior to April 15th.
And she paid April's rent?
She did pay April's rent, Your Honor.
And what about May?
She did not pay May's, June's, or July's.
Did she and her husband and the rest of the people that she moved into the house, did they live there May, June, and July?
Yes, they did, Your Honor. They lived there through August.
Through August?
Well, actually, they had abandoned the property, and I lived out of state, and I repossessed the property with a writ of possession on July 29th.
I just want to know,
yes, ma'am.
When was the last time they lived in the house?
I wouldn't know. I didn't come back to the property until August the 7th.
Okay, when was the last time you lived in the house, Ms. Thomas?
July 31st.
Fine. Can I see your rent receipt from May?
Did not pay the rent from May till June.
Why? You lived there in May.
Yes, ma'am. The rent was due on the 15th of every month.
Right.
I paid April's rent from April 15th to May 15th.
Right.
We notified Mr. Lane that my husband's job was transferring. First, we notified Mr. Brown when we paid April's rent that my husband's job was transferring him to Sarasota, Florida, which is 2 hours away. Told Mr. Lane called. He said, I'll tell you what. He says, you paid half of May's rent, and I will return your security deposit if you're out before June the 15th. However, when I asked for a letter stating the fact, everything changed. He sent me a 3-day notice to vacate. Then he sent me another 3-day notice from a realtor company.
So what?
A month later.
So what? A month later, you were supposed to be out. Why weren't you out in June?
Because he didn't follow his agreement either.
Why weren't you out in June?
Because our house wasn't ready that we were moving to. And
then why didn't you pay rent?
I told him we were moving. And he said that...
Just a second, I don't understand something. Just a minute. Miss Thomas, if what you're telling me is that you moved and that's why you didn't pay rent, that's fine. What you're telling me now is that you told him you were moving, but you didn't move because your house wasn't ready and you didn't pay rent. Just a second.
Okay.
Let's get to objective facts.
Okay.
Miss Thomas, who is this?
This is my daughter, Heather.
All right. Is she a witness?
Yes, she is.
Fine. Then, unfortunately, she has to stay here.
That's fine.
If you live in an apartment or a house that doesn't belong to you, pursuant to a lease, if you live there, you have to pay rent.
I agree.
I don't want to hear any baloney about why you didn't pay rent.
I never said I didn't know it. I owe him for May and June.
Oh, well, that's not what you're saying here.
I have it.
Just a second. I don't see in here that that's what you say, that you owe for May and June. Let me see. In June, we could no longer afford the premises. That's what you wrote in your answer. That's what you swore to. And also, we found out that my husband was being transferred in the latter part of July. What does that have to do with May? And stop playing with your papers. So that has nothing to do with May and June's rent.
I agree. I mean,
We informed the plaintiff that we would be moving, and Mr. Lane was not very happy. He said that if we paid half of May's rent, he would refund our deposit when we moved. However, the money we had given him when we moved in was enough to cover up our rent until July, so we weren't going to pay him anymore. You've got a whole bunch of excuses here, and you can't seem to keep your story straight. You lived there in May, you lived there in June, you lived there in July, and didn't pay rent. Nowhere in your answer do you say, well, I do owe him for May and June.
I've always said I owed him, even the
Now, would you do me a favor, please, Bird? Would you show this answer, this sworn answer that she signed to her, and ask her, maybe I missed it, I don't know how I scored in reading. Show me in your answer where you say you acknowledge that you owe him for 2 months' rent.
I never acknowledged that I owed him for 2 months' rent.
Until now. Oh, fine. Fine, then we get it now. Now you owe him for 2 months' rent.
Well, I also acknowledged when we went to Bovaird County Courthouse that I owed him for 2 months'
Just
rent.
a second. I'm not talking about any place else that you went when he tried to get you
And when I
evicted. I'm
faxed
talking
papers.
about the small claims court, which is where you are. So you forgot to put that down in your answer that you owe him for 2 months' rent.
Okay.
Is that right? You forgot.
Yes,
Fine. You owe him for 2 months' rent. So
Yes,
your rent
ma'am.
was $1,250 times 2 is $2,500. So that you owe him. That you acknowledge you owe him. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Judge Judy continues in a moment. Ex-tenant Kay Thomas owes for 3 months' rent. Larry says Kay is a squatter.
Now, when did you start eviction proceedings against her?
I attempted to start eviction proceedings in May.
So you already knew that this was a lost cause with these people.
I didn't believe it was lost cause, Your Honor.
Well,
to go precautionarily.
Sir, they owe you $2,500 for the 2 months' rent.
What
Now,
about July, Your Honor?
just a minute. Now, did you get first month's rent and last month's rent?
I did, Your Honor.
Just a second. The last month's rent would have been July. Is that right, Mr. Lane?
Yes, ma'am.
What about the security deposit?
Well, Your Honor, there was extensive damage to my home and legal fees,
How much were your legal fees?
$691.
Okay. And what kind of damage was done to the home?
Well, Your Honor, the screens on all windows were damaged. All the blinds were damaged.
Do you have any photographs?
Yes, I do, Your
I'd
Honor.
like to see them.
I also have receipts for blinds.
How did these windows get broken?
Can I see those pictures? I haven't seen them.
Sure.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have pictures also of the day before we moved in and the day we moved out. Would you like to see those?
I would.
These are the 2 screens that he's claiming on the kitchen. That's the 31st. You can see that those are not broke. Living room blind, kitchen, and the other one that we admitted to. These are the 2 that we admitted to.